Thank you for everyone being here tonight. As Carl said, this is the second in our series, How Ritual Affects Our Daily and Religious Lives. Tonight is Lecture 2. Erik Lowcock is presenting on the Baha'i Faith. Tonight's title is Rituals Prohibited, Now What? So here he is in a ritual lecture, and suddenly it's against the rules. So Erik, please. Oh, let me get the screen.
I'm going to sing. They won't let me go without a microphone because they're recording and it feeds into the video. Otherwise, my option would be just vocal, normal. But I wanted to open with a Baha'i prayer, which I set to music. And my wife has been after me for a long time to do a song for her that she could take to competition, and this is the song that she took, one of them. And the reason I set it to music is that it's, the first line is refresh and gladden my spirit, so at the end of the day that's a nice thing to do. And the other thing that we're trying to learn, and we'll get into this a little bit, but the Baha'i calendar, like the Jewish calendar and the Muslim calendar, starts at sunset. So we're about to start a new day for the Baha'is. So. And gladden my spirit, purify my heart, illumine my power, I lay all my affairs in thy hand. Thou art my guide and my refuge. I will no longer be sorrowful and grieve. I will be a happy and joyful being. Oh God, I will no longer be full of anxiety, nor will I let trouble harass me. I will not dwell upon the unpleasant things of life. Oh God, thou art more friend to me than I am to myself. I dedicate myself to thee. Oh Lord, oh Lord, oh Lord. I can't tell you how happy I am to be here and grateful. When Abdu'l-Baha came to this country in 1912, he was invited to speak at many, many churches, and I was just thumbing through a book, it's about that thick, of the talks that he gave, and I noticed he didn't get to a single Presbyterian church. So I'm extremely happy to be here. The other reason I'm happy to be here is because in the last couple of months, Pastor Carl and I have been meeting for prayers, and it's been a privilege to get to know him, an honor to learn what a great man he is, and you guys are very lucky to have him. Although I understand now for not very long, but it's been a privilege, and I thank you. And the other thing I want to do is, on behalf of Benton County Interfaith Association, my wife and I were in Tulsa 2 weekends ago, and there's a favorite place that we go to in Tulsa, but we didn't make it this last time because of our competition. And but I wanted to bring it to the attention of the friends because it's a really wonderful museum in Tulsa. It's there's actually 3 or 4 museums in the building. The bottom level is a Holocaust museum, which I found very touching, and I learned things that I just thought I knew everything about and didn't. It was really quite a touching display. The second floor is the Sherwin-Miller Museum of Art, which has some wonderful art pieces in it. And then the third floor was the one that is kind of my favorite because it has a collection of artifacts from the Jewish congregations that have been in Tulsa for over 100 years. For some reason, there's been a very large Jewish presence in Tulsa for a very long time, and it was kind of interesting to go through and see some of their old Torahs and some of the vestments from their old churches. And so for those who are interested in interfaith understanding, I highly commend the Jewish Museum in Tulsa. It's just beautiful. And if you want to check it out, they have an online presence. Interestingly enough, jewishmuseum.net. I highly recommend going to the museum. And if you're in the vicinity, you might check out, there's a German restaurant not far from there that we enjoyed too, but that's something else. I come before you with no credentials. If anybody was here for the rabbi's talk, there was a doctor of divinity, a doctor of something else which I missed. He had graduated from the Jewish seminary. I was lucky to graduate from this little college that I graduated from in Chicago. There weren't even 2,000 people in the undergraduate class. But it was, I was lucky to graduate, but I was always grateful that I did. But in the process of growing up, for some reason I've always been fascinated with religion, and I kind of, following Spencer's lead, I don't know if anybody saw the advertisement. He said, I even called him one day saying, I'm really uncomfortable writing about myself. And he said, well, just give a little history of what you've done. So following that lead, which made it much easier, I kind of noted some of the things that I've done since I was in junior high. So I studied Confucianism for my term paper. I don't know if you all remember that junior high ordeal of having to put together a term paper. For some bizarre reason, I did it on Confucianism. And then when I was in college, I studied Zen Buddhism. I actually chose the art of tea because for the Japanese, it included not only the religious aspects of Shintoism and Zen Buddhism, but it also included some other influences of art and their notions of aesthetics. And I thought by studying this thing, I could really kind of get a handle on the Japanese. And then I went to Japan and realized, no, I didn't have a clue. So, but there was that study. And then when I was at the University of Chicago, I studied Islam, the Islamic civilization, for 3 quarters. We did quarters there, which is so foreign to me when I'm talking to people with semesters, because we studied a book. Each quarter was a book by Marshall Hodgson, and it was about this thick, and there were 3 of them. So the quarter system worked out well for those 3 books. But Marshall Hodgson made an interesting observation. He said that a lot of books have been written by Western scholars, but none of them were Muslims. And he said it's one thing to write about a faith looking in from the outside, but as he had become a Muslim, he said he felt obliged to write the history from a Muslim's point of view as a Western scholar. So I don't unlike the museum, I wouldn't commend this 3-volume tome unless you're really serious about getting to understand Islamic civilization. But because I'm here sponsored in part by the Benton County Interfaith, I really wanted to mention that work. It's really a beautiful work. It's written, it was a labor to get through books. So when I say that it's readable, it's not like some of the tomes that my professors had me read. And then I have, can I do it from here? No. I'm kind of spastic with this tool here, so I'm going to try and use this one here. While I was at college, I spent a lot of time in the library at a study chorale. And one of the things that really was engraved on above the library at one end of the library was this quote: "Read not to contradict." Was it contradict? "Read not to contradict nor to believe, but to weigh and consider." And I'd like to offer that as sort of a groundwork. Whatever I present, I don't want anybody to believe it. I'm not hoping nobody will contradict it, but just that open. The University of Chicago did teach me one thing, the notion of an open inquiry into the essence of something so that you could understand it. I didn't even agree with some of my professors, but they actually encouraged that. And what's kind of interesting is that the Baha'i Faith does also. Maybe that's why I was attracted to the faith, and we'll get into that in a minute. But this quote I had to share with you for that reason. Can I do this yet? No. And then below, I use a mouse because I'm not real well adept. This read and the weigh and consider part, one of the fundamental principles of the faith is the independent investigation of truth. A Baha'i is forbidden from proselytizing for this reason. We cannot try to convert somebody to the Baha'i faith because that would be contrary to the notion of an individual seeking or investigating the truth for themselves. And I realized that this series was about rituals, and I conferred with Spencer a couple of times about this because the Baha'i faith really has no worship service. We have no rituals, which isn't to say we don't have ceremonies, but, and I'll get to that distinction in a minute, but part of the reason for that is this independent investigation of truth. I always like to think of Bacon here. And as I mentioned to Pastor Carl the other day, one of the things that the Baha'is do on a steady basis is a study circle. So when we say something, we like to show the writings that we're not making this up on our own. So in the beginning of this presentation, I may throw a few quotes at you, but they're more along the line of showing you that what's written in the DNA of our faith. One of the things I would like to encourage you to consider is, I was thinking along the lines this week, how many have cell phones or computers? Everybody here got a computer or had a computer? Anybody not familiar with upgrades? Okay, everybody, I heard the chuckles, so you know what I'm talking about. Well, upgrades happen as capacities increase in this technology, right? New operating system, new features, because people are now ready for these new features. And this little thought popped into my head, well, if technology can be updated by its creator, what about religion being updated by its revealer? And so I just had this kind of just thinking about that for a minute kind of resonated. If mankind has changed in its capacities in the last 100 or 200 years, or the last 1,000 years, or the last 2,000 or 3,000 years. We know it's changed tremendously. Wouldn't it make sense that God would send an update on that revelation at some point in time? Because He's the all-knowing and the all-wise, and He wants us to have the latest, what would suit our capacities. So, this quote from Abdu'l-Baha, I'm going to, what? Oh, yes. And I don't want to go through the whole quote, but I'm going to use Spencer's fancy thing here. He must not rely on the opinion of any man without investigation. Nay, each soul must seek intelligently and independently, arriving at a real conclusion and bound only by that reality. So one thing you'll find that's characteristic of Baha'is is we're kind of like from Missouri, you know, the show me state. I got to prove it for myself. I'm going to try this. That works better, Spencer. Another thing that's sort of a ground rule for Baha'is, we're forbidden. It's written in the DNA for no fanaticism. And I don't know how far you need to look in today's world to see where we are with fanaticism. But I had my own personal experience of that when I went to North Ireland in 1971. Anybody remember that time frame? I was in Londonderry and about to go to a bed and breakfast where I and a friend were staying. And I had 3 soldiers run by me about knee-high in a crouch, each with a small submachine gun, and there were 3 of them on the other side of the street running this way, and I was looking up the street they had just come down. I don't know if that gives you pause or not, but this was about sunset, so I was wondering, do we go up there or not? But this was during the Catholic Protestant really severe difficulties over there. And then we have, of course, ISIS and our dear friends who have... I really like what... has anybody seen Karen Armstrong's TED Talk on compassion? All right. During that TED Talk, which I highly commend, she says that religion has been hijacked by people with political ends. And what that has led to is a confusion for a lot of folks about what's the real faith and what are these people killing each other for. So I really found that comment to resonate with a lot of the difficulties that we're facing. Abdu'l-Baha enunciated this new religious principle is that, excuse me, I'll get out of your ways here. That prejudice and fanaticism, whether sectarian, denominational, patriotic, or political, are destructive to the foundation of human solidarity. Therefore, man should release himself from such bonds in order that the oneness of the world of humanity may become manifest. The oneness of mankind, Baha'u'llah has said, is the essential pivot point of the Baha'i Faith. And everything we do is related to that. And I do apologize for stepping a little outside the series direction of sticking with rituals. But what I thought would be helpful is laying a foundation of some of the beliefs that guide what we do in our daily life. Because as Aristotle said, you've got to have a cause before you can have an effect. There were 4 types of causes, and material efficient. Okay, Spencer, you're going to have to help me here. Formal and, what was the 4th one? I just lost it. Anyway, when you know the purpose, then you know what you're headed for and what guides your activities. Why that is. We can skip the update thought. All right. So what I'm going to do is introduce you to 4 quotes that sort of define Baha'u'llah's definition for what our purpose is, both relating to God, socially, and a couple of other ways. Thank you, dear. I should have had you up here. Lost it. Okay. So going back to that fundamental principle about the oneness. Whoop. Let's see if this helps. There we go. I found this comment by Abdu'l-Baha to help to capture the essence of what I was trying to. God has created us one and all. And if that's true, then I'm kind of skipping through here. Okay, why do we act in opposition to his wishes when we are all his children and love the same Father? All these divisions we see on all sides, all these disputes and opposition are caused because men cling to ritual and outward observances and forget the simple underlying truth. It is the outward practices of religion that are so different, and it is they that cause the disputes and the dissension, while the reality is always the same and one. Does that make sense? I see some nodding and some, well, maybe. Abdu'l-Baha was, the Baha'i writings even go even more explicitly. Prescribed ritual is forbidden in the Baha'i Faith. So it may, I got to thinking about this, I've been thinking about this ever since Spencer told me the title, but maybe that's why Baha'u'llah said there would be no clergy either, because sometimes the clergy tends to create rituals to help, that they think is helping when it starts to create some of this division that causes the disunity in the world. Well-intentioned or not, but it helps. So as far as Baha'is go, they should take the utmost care that any manner they practice should not acquire too rigid a character and thus develop into an institution. Any questions on that? Not.
Isn't it interesting, as groups of people gather, they always seem to
I've even experienced that in the Baha'i community. I was in one community and there were Persians who traditionally turned to the east towards our world center where the shrines are whenever they said the tablet of visitation. And this was like even when we were having a public meeting, friends, and it had kind of become a ritual, and we had to have a discussion about how this was not appropriate within the context of the Baha'i writings. So I love your comment because you're exactly right. Mankind wants something to be the same and familiar. But the previous quote that we looked at, the Guardian said we are all free to adopt things to our own use. And this is even true of the marriage ceremony. There's only one thing that must take place for a Baha'i ceremony, according to Baha'u'llah. The bride and the groom must each repeat the phrase, "We will all verily abide by the will of God." He said that covers it. If you abide by the will of God, everything else. And so brides and grooms often make a much more elaborate wedding thing by having writings, sometimes from Khalil Gibran, sometimes from the Bible, sometimes from other Baha'i writings or prayers. But there's no ritual, there's no set form. You go to 10 Baha'i weddings and you'll see 10 Baha'i, totally radically different things. Some people have music, some people include their family, some people don't include the family. So there is, again, no ritual form for it. Simplicity and dignity is what's to characterize them. And that's what, I hit the wrong button. Sorry about that.
How'd you do that?
I don't know. The friend should always maintain a standard of utmost simplicity and observe flexibility in all manners of detail. Oh, we'll get to that real soon. Real soon. In fact, I can even skip this one. I just put this in because it's, as the old Missouri saying would be, it's in black and white. There's no clergy in the Baha'i Faith. There is no ecclesiastical orders. There's no paid positions for such. And in fact, you'll notice in the second paragraph, the duties of teaching and pioneering are enjoined on all believers. Every one of us have the responsibility to teach. Every one of us has the responsibility to do the things. In fact, I've started calling the Baha'i Faith a do-it-yourself faith, because nobody else, you can't ask, you could ask, but you can't expect anybody else to do what you think needs to be done in the Baha'i Faith. You need to, stand up and shoulder it.
Eric, what is the difference between, it's the duties of teaching and pioneering? What would you describe the difference between pioneering and proselytizing?
Oh, okay. If I remember correctly, the definition of proselytizing is to use blandishments or inducements to make somebody convert to your faith. So what Baha'is do, we don't... so when a Baha'i goes pioneering, he does not have the authority to convert... I used to say this in a kind of light-hearted manner, and I'm afraid to say it because I don't want to offend anybody, but it's the notion of we're not there to convert the heathen. We're there to live a life that we hope will encourage people to examine the faith and decide for themselves whether they're interested in the faith. So the difference between teaching and, it's kind of more along the line, thank you, my wife just said it's more along the line of sharing, which isn't to say that we don't encourage people to investigate the faith. Obviously we do, but we don't have any... I don't think people do it much in any religion so much nowadays, but in days past there was a lot of... help me out here, I'm sinking into quicksand.
Are you talking about...
When the proselytizing versus teaching. Well, some evangelism is just stepping out of your comfort zone and going to tell somebody else. But the evangelism that starts browbeating people and in using bribes of some kind, like in some places they'll build a hospital and say you can't use the hospital unless you're one of our members. So, I mean, it's kind of like an above and beyond inducement to become a member of the community when it's not the same thing. And it's a very difficult thing. I mean, I'm not saying Baha'is don't get enthusiastic about teaching. But we're forbidden from fanaticism and proselytizing. And it goes back to that fundamental principle that from a Baha'i point of view, every soul is accountable to God for turning towards Him or not. And even Baha'u'llah in some of the prayers says, let whosoever desireth turn aside from this counsel, and let whosoever desireth choose his path to his Lord. So Baha'is have I don't want to say laid back, because they're certainly enthusiastic Baha'is, but it's just I keep coming back to this notion that there's some things in religion past that because it wasn't specifically stated, people have tended to make it extreme. I mean, the Muslims are now killing Christians and other Muslims. If you read the book of the Quran, that's not in there. He never said to do these things, but they're using it as an excuse to slaughter everybody. So what Baha'u'llah did in this dispensation was to say absolutely categorically none of this stuff. Does that help answer your question? Okay. Yep. Yeah, we don't need that one. I'm just getting this up. Here we go. So, these are the four purposes that I wanted to, from a Baha'i point of view. Baha'u'llah says that the nature of the soul after death can never be described. But the prophets and messengers of God have been sent down for the sole purpose of guiding mankind to the straight path of truth. The purpose underlying their revelation hath been to educate all men that they may at the hour of death ascend in the utmost purity and sanctity and with absolute detachment to the throne of the Most High. So that's kind of a long way of saying our fundamental purpose for being created is to know and love God. So that at the hour of our death, we're detached from all save Him. With regard to religion, Baha'u'llah says that the fundamental purpose animating the faith of God and His religion is to safeguard the interests and to promote the unity of the human race and to foster the spirit of love and fellowship amongst men. I included the whole quote, but that's the essential part of it. And as I've shared with the friends at the Benton County Interfaith, one of Baha'u'llah's quotes is, consort with people of all religions in a spirit of love and fellowship. This notion of unity is the bedrock of the Baha'i Faith. We're not even supposed to get into arguments with people. I mean, negative arguments. I don't mean being able to discuss a point, but we're forbidden from arguing with people in a way that causes dissension. And Baha'u'llah said, where two argue, you're both wrong. I don't care who's right. It's kind of the paraphrase of it. So this notion of arguing over theological points is forbidden in the faith. And in fact, it's one of the reasons I feel honored to be a part of the Benton County Interfaith Alliance and working with people like Pastor Carl and some of the others in this group, trying to help get it going on a more solid foundation. And Baha'u'llah says that religion is the sole instrument for uniting the world. Only God can achieve it because we're so full of our own misconceptions and prejudices and stereotypes. I was driving over here, right here on New Hope. I saw a blonde in a red Camaro convertible, and I thought, I ought to be young again. I pulled up next to her, and the lady was in her 60s. And I thought, man, you're just never free of those prejudices, are you? But Baha'u'llah said, God sent religion for the purpose of establishing fellowship amongst humankind. Right? You know, love one another. I mean, how often does it have to be said? Not to create strife and discord, for all religion is founded upon the love of humanity. Abraham promulgated this principle. Moses summoned all to its recognition. Christ established it, and Muhammad directed mankind to its standard. This is the reality of religion. And he says if religion and faith cause sedition, and it would have been better not to have had it. So we have to reform society. It isn't that religion is at fault, it's mankind's kind of, the way we're using it against each other is what's kind of at fault. Didn't Christ say there are many mansions in my Father's house? Do I have that reasonably close? And then, what is our purpose in general in life? Because I know especially us guys, what's my purpose in life? Baha'u'llah says that the purpose of life is to develop the powers and capacities latent within us so that we may contribute our share to an ever-advancing civilization. The notion that the world's going to end and just explode into tiny cinders isn't helpful to building up humanity. The purpose of education is to catalyze and guide this process. And we're not going to go into that other. It's a very long quote. But education is a fundamental part of the faith. As is, I've got to collapse that one or we're going to be scrolling down for a while. There we go. So with these purposes in mind, these are the patterns of Baha'i life. And as you'll notice, we'll get to the 3 obligatory prayers real soon here. Because if the fundamental purpose in being created is to know and love God, how do we best do that? Through prayer and meditation on the sacred writings. So, to that end, and this is getting not to our rituals, but to our patterns of life, we're to pray and read twice daily, morning and evening. And when I say read, I mean read from the sacred writings. We're also enjoined to say an obligatory prayer. And we have a choice of one of 3 of them. So the short prayer can be said any time between noon and sunset, and I just closed that one. And it's the only prayer I included here because it's really short. I bear witness, O my God, that thou hast created me to know thee and to worship thee. I testify at this moment to my powerlessness and to thy might, to my poverty and to thy wealth. There is none other God but thee, the help in peril, the self-subsisting. Needless to say, this is the choice most Baha'is make. It's short. I can do it within about what is it? Well, now we got noon to 8. You got almost 8 hours to get it in. And it's 3 sentences, right? 1, 2, 3. I think it's 3 sentences. So that makes, okay, I've done my obligatory prayer. But then we have the medium prayer, which is actually to be said 3 times a day and includes ablutions, which is the washing of one's face and one's hands before we do it. And then there are a few movements. And then the long obligatory prayer, I was going to bring a prayer book. It's about 7 pages long in the Baha'i prayer book, which is a book about this size. So it's a lot of, and there are movements that go with it. So, excuse me?
Isn't that ritualistic?
Well, a ritual in the general sense is conducted by a clergy on behalf of the congregation, either as an intermediary from God to that individual or back. So if you mean it to be something that you do on a regular basis, okay, that would be a ritual, but it's not a part of ritual worship. You choose which of these you do. And you can change one from day to day. So I'll go with you that it's a kind of a ritual. But it doesn't take place in a church setting where you have the sacraments, the rituals that are officiated by a clergy person. I wish Rabbi was here tonight, because last time he took the definition of ritual and expanded it to cover literally every little thing, like how he tied his shoelaces. My professors, was a small school, but they said that when you take a definition and expand it to cover so much, it loses power to convey meaning. And said that the power of a definition is in that its precision and its ability to convey a specific meaning. So I wanted to consult with the rabbi about that one. But in the sense that we have a regular prayer that we do, yes, that might be considered a ritual. The sacred scriptures and meditating on them. Well, usually the Baha'i central figures, which would be the Bab, Baha'u'llah, and Abdul Baha, or the Bible, or the Quran, or what you guys would call, it's not all of the Old Testament. The Pentateuch was the original book of Moses. So that was about the first, five books of the Bible would be considered holy in that sense. The rest of it's, you'd need your theologian in residence here talk about the other books in the Old Testament, but which isn't to deny their validity as spiritual scripture, just they weren't part of the original revelation. Okay? I'm getting braver.
And do you read these readings together as a group or just individually?
No, all of this is as an individual. Pray and meditate as an individual. Which does not mean we don't do that together, but that's on an... It's not the same thing. I'm just going to put it that way. And I included this, but this kind of summarizes these daily obligatory prayers, together with a few other specific ones, have been invested by Baha'u'llah with a special potency and significance and should therefore be accepted as such. That through them they may enter a much closer communion with God and identify themselves more fully with His laws and precepts. So this notion of getting closer to God is just, it's at the heart of every religion, but we really affirmed with Baha'u'llah. And then he said, take a lot of time for these things, meaning pray and meditate. The way to acquire the thirst for spirituality is to study the holy words, read your Bible, read the holy books, especially study the holy utterances of Baha'u'llah. Prayer and meditation. Take much time for these two. Then you will acquire this great thirst for spirituality. Would you say that society today has a great thirst for spirituality? It seems lost.
The unquestioning faith, that seems to me in conflict with the concept of everyone seeking truth.
Where were you? Oh, okay. Why? Yeah. Oh, you read it good, Noah. When you're seeking something and you're looking for a source or a path, be all investigative. But if your goal is God and you believe in God, then that's where the difference is between investigating the truth. You don't give up investigating truth just to have faith. Does that help?
You don't give up what? I'm sorry.
Investigating the truth. Well, the whole basis of religion is a belief in God. Does it? All right? So far, that's okay. So faith is what we exercise when we trust in God to see us through a quest. But that doesn't mean we stop investigating what we see around us to investigate the truth of the matter. So, I mean, even as a Baha'i, I'll sometimes, Baha'i or the writings will say something, and I'll go, what the heck does he mean by that? Because I don't understand it. I remember coming across a quote that said, the good deeds of the faithful are the sins of the near ones. And, you know, to you that may be really apparent what that means, but I puzzled over that for months, trying to investigate the truth of what that meant. But it didn't mean I gave up my faith in God. God was the object of my quest. God is the object of my quest. So I have faith in God, but that doesn't mean I haven't suspended my investigation of truth. And usually the truth is something that reveals itself in the consultation of friends. We'll get to another part of that. Does that help a little bit? Because faith in God...
Wrestling with this particular phrasing because,
Okay.
because it doesn't say unquestioning faith in God. It says unquestioning faith in these particular prayers that you're
Okay.
and so I'm curious about how that, what seems to me I don't want you to spend a whole lot of time.
Okay. Good question. I have another answer to it, but it's longer, so we will move on. So, and this comes back to a pattern of life that, frankly, the Baha'is have not yet reached. But I wish I had been able to get to the... No, let me do... Oh, here we go. What did I do? Slip down a whole page? Sorry about that, friends. So, Baha'i houses of worship are called Mashriq al-Azkars, which means the dawning place of the mention of God. They're also called Baha'i houses of worship sometimes, just to avoid the Arabic. But the whole purpose, and this comes back to the notion of the worship service, which is actually lacking in the Baha'i faith. The purpose of a house of worship is to say devotions and then go out and be of service to the world. There's another phrase, I don't know if I included it later on, but Baha'u'llah says the days when idol worship was deemed sufficient are ended. Nothing but deeds of stainless purity are what's required in the world. So he's kind of stepped up the standard for what a person of faith is to be about. The structure and dependencies of the house of worship is supposed to be surrounded with, where's my pointer here? Education, healthcare, and other services concerned with the social and economic progress of the community. So in essence, the Baha'i house of worship isn't for Baha'is. As a matter of fact, local Baha'i communities cannot use the house of worship for their community activities. It's built for the world. And if you go to the Chicago and, Wilmette is just north of Chicago. If you go to Wilmette for the North American house of worship, you'd find that there are visitors coming and going and saying prayers from morning till night for as long as it's open, because it's open to anybody to go in and say prayers. And the point of it is that you go to say prayers so that you can go to work with an attitude of work is worship. And Shoghi Effendi sort of underlined this notion when he said that Baha'i, where's the thing? Here it is. Baha'i worship, however exalted, can never hope to achieve beyond a meager, often transitory results of a contemplations of an ascetic or a passive. It cannot afford lasting satisfaction, benefit to the worshiper himself, much less to humanity, unless and until translated and transfused into a dynamic and disinterested service to the cause of humanity, which is the point of the dependencies of the Azkar to facilitate. We sometimes joke about the guardian's sentences. One sentence can go almost a page long because he was educated at Oxford. So it's kind of like he packed every nuance into one sentence. But essentially what he was saying is worship by itself isn't enough for a Baha'i. He has to be involved in making the world a better place. And however he chooses to do that is fundamental, absolutely fundamental. Oh, here it is, let deeds. Guidance hath ever been given by words, and now it is given by deeds. Everyone must show forth deeds that are pure and holy, for words are the property of all alike, whereas such deeds as these belong only to our loved ones. Strive then with heart and soul to distinguish yourselves by your deeds. Right now there's just a few houses of worship in the world. Am I going to be able to do this? So, Spencer and I practiced this earlier. Here they are. So this is the Baha'i House of Worship, the Mashriq al-Azkar in Wilmette, North Chicago. It has been there for a very long time. Wilmette, which is actually north of Evanston, but it's right on the lake. Next. Oh. Right now there are only continental houses of worship, so there's about 7 of them. Oops, wrong one. This is the one being constructed in Chile, Santiago, Chile. This is one that was built in Frankfurt, Germany in the 50s. Oh, we got 2 of that. This is the Lotus Temple in India, which is for the subcontinent. Interestingly enough, the government of India allowed the Baha'is to build this in a park that was next to a Buddhist temple. And once the house of worship was built, the Buddhists now come over to the house of worship to pray every morning. And this temple receives, I don't think I'm stretching it to say, over 1 million visitors a year. It was hand-built. Literally every aspect of this was built by people. They hauled the concrete up in pails and poured it. And there's actually a film that was done by some architectural interested entity that documented how this house of worship was built just by loving hands and volunteers who wanted to be a part of it. Nope, not exact. That's kind of a tricky thing to answer. We don't worship on Sundays. We don't have a worship service. In a minute here, I'll get. How am I doing time? Ooh. I'll get to that, but I will cover some of our calendar in a minute. Thank you for asking that. There's some of the visitors going to the house of worship there. This is in Kampala, Uganda, the African. I always wondered why they built a house of worship where Idi Amin was living and president, but it was amazing. And this is in Panama. And this one is in Samoa. And this is in Sydney, Australia. And we're back to Wilmette. And that shows you, that's a little picture, but that's Lake Michigan there in the upper right. It's right on the, I was going to say riverbank, because there's a river that runs, there's a river right here, but there's also a big beach here on Lake Michigan. Is that it? I hope. Yep. All right.
Large domes seem to be common.
Well, they reflect the central theme. 9 is the greatest single digit in magnitude, and also the single digit. So it represents the highest form of unity. So all of the Baha'i houses of worship have 9 sides. And that's to signify that people from any religion can come there and worship and are welcome to do so. So you'll see that theme is characteristic of every Baha'i house of worship that's built, 9 sides. And in fact, the Baha'i communities, being as small and diverse, spread out as we are, there have only been the continental houses of worship up till now. However, there are several communities that have reached such a significant size that they are now, there are plans for some local Mashriq al-Azkars to be built in about, what was it, 4 or 5 places around the world. I think we've covered this, but I just wanted to reinforce this notion that refining one's inner character and service to humanity are inseparable facets of life for a Baha'i. So the rituals aren't as important as being of service to humanity, and however we choose to do that, through our work, whatever. Okay. In keeping with the requisite to stick with rituals, more or less, I haven't done anything about Baha'i history. I will address nothing about Baha'i administration except a very light brushstroke. But I did want to include a couple of things that we've already touched on a little bit. The independent investigation of truth is a personal commitment, work done to the best of our abilities. How did it do that? That went all the way to the bottom. You'll notice here that Baha'u'llah is rather adamant that we should not waste our time in idleness and sloth, that we should occupy ourselves with that which will profit ourselves and others. And as a result, we have graciously exalted your engagement such work to the rank of worship unto God, the one true one. And he uses the example that a paper maker, which I'm assuming in Persia was one of the lowest occupations. He said if a paper maker makes that piece of paper to the very best of his ability, that would be equivalent to worshiping God, because he's doing it with his heart and his soul, not just showing up and punching the time clock as we would have in the West. As a result, community development depends on individuals to arise. As I mentioned earlier, it's a do-it-yourself faith, because we don't have paid people that we can say, oh, let the pastor do it. We have to do it. We do have boards that are elected, which I'll get to in a second. Another very great important principle for Baha'is is the principle of consultation. Baha'u'llah says that the heaven of divine wisdom is illumined with consultation and compassion. Take ye counsel together in all matters, inasmuch as consultation is the lamp of guidance, which leadeth the way and is the bestower of understanding. It's so fundamental that it should exist in families. A family should consult. My wife and I consult. There was a phrase that he said in another passage. He says, consult in all matters, great and small. No matter how trivial, you should consult about them. My wife and I make very, I was going to say no decisions without consulting, but a lot of her dance things I don't get involved in. But other than the dance stuff, issues, and about which competitions to go with, we consult about everything. It's just a matter of bringing into life this practice. So you'll notice that it's more about bringing into a Baha'i life not rituals of things that we do, but attitudes and principles that guide our lives are more important. Social, and here's the quote that I wanted to consort with the followers of all religions in a spirit of friendliness and fellowship. Whatsoever hath led the children of men to shun one another and hath caused divisions and dissensions amongst them hath through the revelation of these words been nullified and abolished. And again, he says the same. This is so important. I as a Baha'i should not ever get upset with somebody, is what he's saying. I'm to consort with them with love and fellowship, no matter how I feel about them. And as a, I know, well, I don't like it a lot of the times, but like when a guy cuts me off, and my wife will attest that I wasn't the loving and understanding person I should have been. But This is also a quote that is often memorized by the Baha'is. A kindly tongue is the lodestone of the hearts of men. It is the bread of the Spirit. It clotheth the words with meaning. It is the fountain of light and wisdom of understanding. Oh. So I said I would not belabor you with all of our administrative order, but I did just want to touch on it. At the local level, we have a local spiritual assembly wherever 9 or more Baha'is reside. If there's only 9, they form it's called a joint declaration. If there are more than 9, then they must hold an election process. And part of that election is we are forbidden to campaign or nominate. It's just you prayerfully gather, you cast your votes, and whoever gets the 9 most votes, those are your elected board. You're not even allowed to get up and say, I think somebody would be really great for this job. It's absolutely verboten. We say prayers, we turn to God, we ask for guidance, and then you cast your votes. It's that simple. Regional councils are a new thing. And I'll come back to them in a minute. Then there's the National Spiritual Assembly, which is elected annually by delegates, which everybody at a local level or a regional level gathers for a convention once a year, and we cast our votes in the same way. There's no nominations, no campaigning, no, geez, I don't know anybody else but these people. Well, then that's all you can vote for. There are certain qualifications. Baha'u'llah says that they should be pure and stainless and of sound mind and judgment, and there's a lot of spiritual qualities that are there, but it's up to us to get to know the people in our district so that we can vote for a delegate, and then the delegates go to national, and they have a national convention and they elect the National Spiritual Assembly. That's the second phase. And then once every 5 years, the members of the National Spiritual Assembly gather in Haifa, Israel, to elect the Universal House of Justice. So indirectly, every Baha'i helps elect their National Spiritual Assembly and their Universal House of Justice members. And each board is composed of 9 people. Then that's the elected side. Then we have an appointed side. And these are the Continental Board of Counselors, the auxiliary board members. This is area teaching committee, but that exists, that's kind of new. And then there are institutes. And what's really fascinating is that the administrative order of the faith is evolving as the faith grows. It's one of those things where this principle of flexibility and simplicity that the Guardian enunciated in that earlier quote comes into play in the administrative order. Initially there were the national spiritual assemblies and the local spiritual assemblies and the Universal House of Justice, and now we have clusters and regional councils and some other things that help make it more focused, the efforts of the Friends, and help them to develop their community building abilities. Now to your question about a day. We don't have a worship service, but the Baha'i calendar consists of... Oh, darn. I lost the... It got bigger on me. Zoom down. Where are we at? 200? Let's do this. 150. Yeah. Okay. I wanted to get down here because there are 19 months in a Baha'i year. Each month is 19 days. It works out pretty cool, except when you're trying to live on a Gregorian calendar. Each month is named for an attribute of God. So you'll see you'll notice on these are the Persian, or the Arabic terms, and then this is what it means in, why does my clicker, and this is the English. So, Rahmat is mercy, but it also has these meanings. Now, because every month has 19 days, each day in the month has the same name. So, for example, the 19th day of the 19th month would be Allah Allah. Which is to reinforce the notion that we can meditate on the day's name to get closer to God. Because if we meditate upon the names of God and try to emulate them, I should go back. One of the reasons that we meditate on the sacred writings is because we are enjoined to translate, you might remember this phrase, translate that dynamic into a reality. We're not just idly thinking about the writings, we're supposed to think, how can I translate that into my daily life and change my life? Because Baha'u'llah says if religion doesn't transform us, what's the point? It's supposed to transform us spiritually. So that gives us two choices in a sense. Like if it was the 13th day of the Quadrat, it would be power of the 19th month, then I could choose which of those attributes I wanted to focus on in my readings, or however to manifest that. Because Baha'u'llah says we're also to manifest the names of God. I'm to manifest mercy. I'm to manifest loving kindness. I'm to manifest power and majesty. While I was going to the University of Chicago, I spent a couple of months thinking, how do I manifest majesty? And I caught myself looking in a mirror, and I was like, oh, that doesn't look too majestic. So I've tried to correct my posture as a result of trying to manifest majesty, because God is majestic. It transformed me. Also, we have a third option. Each day of the Gregorian week, our 7-day week, also has a name that we can use. So today being Thursday would be, I hope it's a simple one, Ishtijlal, I don't know how to pronounce that, but majesty. Oh my goodness, that was fortunate. Majesty. So I'm manifesting majesty today. Also we have, I've talked about we're supposed to be transforming society, so we have a culture of learning and a community building at the grassroots that's a fundamental part of being a Baha'i, and that's where the institute process comes in. Building community is a heart-to-heart thing. And while we have what they call four core activities: devotionals, adult study circles, children's classes, and junior youth sessions. And I remember when this was first enunciated to the Baha'is, a lot of them were really upset because they always had children's classes for the Baha'i children at the Baha'i Center. And suddenly the House of Justice said, wait a minute, you guys, you kind of missed the point. It's supposed to help transform society. You need to start doing this in your neighborhoods. And I can't tell you the number of people that were upset about that, because there were a ton just in my community. I was living in Austin at the time. But the House of Justice has gently, over 10, 20 years now, has been gently helping us stop thinking about what we're doing for the Baha'i community and start thinking about what can we do for the community at large. Because it's not enough just to be helping ourselves. And that's a growing, part of that's a matter of resources. If there's only my wife and I in Bentonville, there's not a whole lot we're going to be able to do. But when there's a community of several hundred in Austin or several thousand in LA, they have resources. They can do things like that. And that's not to excuse us for not doing them, but I'm just saying resources has a big influence on that. I'm going to, any questions on that part? Community building has been a very large part of the House of Justice's messages in the last few years. And what I find amazing is that most of the time, the core activities in some of these other places, Baha'is are the minority in them. They're actually being led sometimes by people who are Christians and Muslims in America or other places. And it'll have half the community in some places that are involved in these core activities. There are some villages in South America where almost the entire village is going through the children's classes and junior youth sessions, and only 10 to 20% of them are Baha'is. Everybody else is just a part of them. Am I running out of time? Oh, I think we'll be done before then, but let me just get to this. We are enjoined to go on pilgrimage once in our life. And we go to Haifa. The Baha'i World Center is situated on the slopes of Mount Carmel. And I included this. Oh, we did it? Okay. This is the west face of Mount Carmel. It faces across the bay to Akka, the prison city, which during not too long ago was just nothing but it was a penal colony. So this is a picture that was taken at the very beginning of building the Shrine of the Bab. You can barely tell it's there. And you can tell that this is just one massive desert. It's scrub brush, it's rock, and it's so doggone steep. I'll show you a couple of pictures in a minute once I get this set, if I can. Got it. This is what it looked like. Oh, can I go back? Can I go back? Will backspace go back? Right click. No. I have to move it. That's what I didn't want to do. Okay. What you see is this street here. On both sides are the Templar colony. Anybody familiar with the Templars? Oh, good. For those who aren't, during the middle of the 1800s, the 19th century, the middle of the 19th century, everybody had this expectancy. How would you describe it? Everybody was awaiting the coming of Christ. The Templars, the Millerites, there were a vast number of movements that caught this spirit. And the Templars were the German contingent that sold all of their possessions in Germany and moved to the slopes of Mount Carmel so that they'd be ready when the Lord came. In fact, there's some of the houses had inscriptions over them. One is "Der Herr ist nahe," the Lord is near. And they all moved there, and they lived there until about the 1890s. And then they just started to kind of fade out because they thought, nothing's happening. This street is now Ben Gurion, and it's kind of fun to see the difference. Yes. This is a closer look at what that... many of the enemies of the faith said, oh, the Baha'is are building a fortress and they're going to foment sedition. And it was a large reason that there was a very big upsurge in persecution. But Abdul-Baha was just creating the resting place for the Bab. This is what happened. The Baha'is have transformed the desert. This is under construction. You can see all of the construction going on in here, and this is just piles of dirt, and you can just still see how much of a desert that is. And then we go one more, and this is what it's starting to look in now. Is it not plugged in up here? Well. Okay. Well, if we go dark, I'd better hurry it up. Whoa. And this is what it looks like, a more current picture. And then this is what it looks like now. And what's happened is for the longest time, there were so many people fighting the Baha'is because it was the Arab contingent was saying it was displacing Arabs. The Israelis wanted, the mayor of the town, the city council wanted highways to go through these gardens because the left side is cut off now from the right side except for Mount Hutzonite. I can't pronounce the name of the street. There's only one street that runs through the Baha'i gardens now. It's been submerged and it goes right under the terrace. I'll show you in a second, in fact. Yeah. This is the lower terrace. Terraces leading up. There are 9 terraces below the Shrine of the Bab and 9 terraces above. And this, what you see here, is actually over a 4 or a 6-lane road that's underneath it. And so what they've done is they created a way to keep the road going through the gardens, but not to, you can't even tell the road is there. It's almost a tunnel underneath this. And these are some of the pools that were added. And these are 2 of my favorite views of my wife and daughter when we were on pilgrimage. This is what it's like at night. And you can see the street down there. It's now it's now a 4-lane. That little ox cart where that guy was going up. This is the Ark. The Universal House of Justice, seat of the Universal House of Justice, International Teaching Center, the Center for the Study of the Sacred Texts, and the archives. So things that belong to the Bab and Baha'u'llah are stored here. You only get in there and you can only see them when you're on pilgrimage. You can see some of the things. The House of Justice is where they receive, receive dignitaries from other parts of the world. I was going to show them the hills, but not happening, is it? That's a way to keep my talk short. So, any questions? 1844 is the inception is May 23rd, 1844, when the Bab declared himself to Mullah Hussein. Yeah.
How many Baha'is?
The figure that I saw last was over 6 million. But, you know, it's kind of hard to tell when you have entire villages in different parts of the world that are Baha'i and then other places. That's a reasonable estimate.
How many in North Dakota?
Oh, baby. Well, my wife and I and one other lady are Baha'is in Bentonville. Rogers has an assembly, so there's at least 9 there. And Springdale has an assembly and Fayetteville has an assembly. So unlike churches that can attract people from a whole wide metro area, but the way the administration was set up for the faith, we have to follow civil jurisdictions. And I remember once living in Orlando, I was on the east side in the county. So Orlando proper had one Baha'i community, and then the east and the west county had to somehow figure out how to get together, and it was 50 minutes through Orlando if the feast was held on the other side. Oh, I was going to answer your question on that calendar thing because it does pertain. So Baha'is don't have a Sunday worship service. However, once every 19 days, once a month, we gather for what's called feast. And it does open with a few devotions, maybe a reading or 2 from the writings. And then we have, but its purpose is to conduct community business, because there's no clergy or people to do the business for us. That's where we raise our questions, have our announcements, talk about what we want to do in the future and what things we want to do. And then the third part of it, and this comes close to a ritual now because this is a pattern of behavior, then the third phase of that feast is that there's supposed to be a social gathering. And Baha'u'llah even said, even if it's only with bread and water, you should have something to eat together and to socialize. So it sort of cements the community, usually. I've known some Baha'i communities that weren't cemented together, but it's a way of fostering that. And so once every 19 days we have the feast day, but since it's about conducting business and the devotions are sort of to bless it and remind us that we're always doing God's work, it's not quite the same. Okay? Any other? Yeah, Noah.
So, I was just thinking about, like, I know some people who identify as Christian Buddhists.
Okay.
And would it be possible to reconcile Baha'i with another faith and identify with both?
In the old days they did. In fact, in the old days when the faith was very new to America, people were ministers, in fact, in the Christian churches. There are a number of American Baha'is who were ministers in their churches. And then at one point in time, the Guardian said, now it's time to not confuse people with that. It was sort of a time it was a growing maturity. One of the most interesting facets of the faith is that Baha'u'llah has revealed a lot of laws that aren't even in effect. And the House of Justice governs when it feels the world is ready for it. In fact, the issue of the calendar just happened this year. Just this year, the House of Justice said, okay, now is the time to start getting into the pattern of the Baha'i calendar. So I printed what you saw on that page. I printed it out. I've taped it on my pantry door in the kitchen, and every morning I try to remember to look at it and remind myself what is the day Baha'i-wise. Because it's tough when you're living in another calendar system. Sorry. I mentioned this to Carl, but I so worry about being the little boy. You ever heard of the little boy who went to his mother and said, Mom, can you help me with this math problem? And she said, son, your father's an engineer. Go ask him. He knows all about math. And he goes, Mom, I didn't want to know that much. I just wanted the answer. I worry about being the father. So forgive me if I run a little long in my explanations. There was another question.
Did I misinterpret, or did you at one point say that you weren't allowed to argue?
Not allowed. But certainly it's... highly, that's a good word for it, highly discouraged. Well, you're not supposed to do it, period. But as I said earlier, there's a difference between consultation that produces what Abdu'l-Baha called the spark of conflict, that it illumines the issue so that you can better see the truth of the matter. Which isn't to say we're not emotional, but we shouldn't get to the point of arguing over something that becomes negative. And that's a hard line to walk. I've been on...
Promote the availability of being abused and taken advantage of?
Why? How?
Well, if I say that you need to pay me $1,000 for a dance lesson instead of $500, and we'd already agreed to $500, are you going to argue with me?
Well, you're talking about contractual business stuff. We're talking about within the context of religious dialogue and decisions in the community. So for those sort of issues, they would take it to the assembly and consult with the assembly, and then the assembly would decide. So there is a venue for that.
So what about extremists in your faith? The extremists in the Muslim faith are killing people because
Yeah.
the Christian faith won't dance. But what are the extremists in yours?
Well, I don't know if you were following, but fanaticism is just, it's in the DNA. No fanaticism is allowed. And it's mentioned so often. I mean, and then there's the other thing about humility, acquiring the spiritual virtues of humility and respect and just all of the other things that go with it, that when you're on the path, those sort of things don't come up quite as often. And the fact that it's explicit, I think that's one of the things that I found really unique about the Baha'i teachings, is that a lot of things are implicit in all of the religions. If you look at them, the spiritual truths are the same. That was what Abdu'l-Baha was saying. It's the forms that men put onto the religion that tends to create the divisions amongst us. But the spiritual truth about showing love to your neighbor, compassion and kindness and forgiveness and all of these virtues, the names of God, those are the same in all of them. It's only the spiritual teachings that vary because of the conditions of the world at that time vary. So when Moses came, they were involved in tribal life. When Jesus came, mankind had advanced to city-states. You had Jerusalem, Rome, you had Athens, you had the city-states of Sparta. And then when Muhammad came, he introduced the concept of nationhood and said, now is the time to reorganize yourself. And now Baha'u'llah is talking about we must be world citizens. He said it's not him who loves his country, but him who loves his kind, that we should always be thinking about the world at large and trying to make it better. Yeah? Doug? It goes back to the notion that it's the greatest integer, single integer. So it represents the highest level of unity. Because if you go to 10, you've got 2 digits. Now you've got separation. So 9 is the highest number of unitary digit. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if there's more to it, you know. Persian culture actually has a lot of associated meanings with numbers. They even would talk about their names in terms of numbers because their first letter and their second letter and their third letter added up to something. But that's a cultural thing that I'm clueless. I'm an American. What do you call somebody that speaks 3 languages? Trilingual? 2 languages? 1 language? American.
Have you heard not 2, not 1?
No. Not 2, no.
Heard that in, as people might describe their relationship.
Okay. Not 1. Okay. Well, I like what Jesus said about marriage, where the 2 shall be combined into 1. And Baha'u'llah continues that notion that from a marriage of 2 souls, there is created a new entity that incorporates both of them. It's kind of an interesting, yeah, Doug. Yeah.
So do Baha'is tend to be
Yeah. Baha'u'llah has forbidden, well, as activists, absolutely. Because from the Baha'i perspective, Baha'u'llah says the problems of the world are not political, they're spiritual. If people really cared about one another, we wouldn't have any of this issue. We wouldn't have the fanaticism, the respect, and all of the other things that come with, caring for your fellow man. So it's about revolutionizing hearts. Revolutionizing? That wasn't the right word, but transforming. Well, the Guardian also said that we should be well informed and vote for the best possible candidate. So it's not like we don't care, but we don't get active politically. And that's not even 100% true. But part of the reason for that is that politics separates people. So the fundamental, well, then they start arguing like our friend back here was worried about. So from a Baha'i perspective, everything has to, whatever we do has to contribute to unity. So even the marriage laws that Baha'u'llah established, we cannot get married without parental consent. Every living parent has to give their assent in order for us to be married. And it doesn't matter if you're 18 or 80. Every living parent. I had to wait. We would have been married much sooner. I met my wife in October and we were married in February. It would have been much sooner had my parents been able to get their permission to us sooner. We were waiting. And I was 35 at the time. So, but,
you have no parents?
well, living parents. So if they're not alive, no, you don't have to wait on them. Because it could be a long wait. Yeah.
Tell me about the connections to the community that you see in our community.
In our area?
Yeah.
What? Can you give me a context? I mean, there's so many connections.
You've stated that the mission is to go beyond the walls of the
Right.
church. Give me some examples of what ways the community in Rogers, if it's larger than your life, in what kinds of ways are they connecting to the community of Rogers?
Right. There's a youth program. Well, let me back up to the cluster level first, because we don't have, I don't think even Rogers has much. Half the Baha'i community in Rogers is helping to run a nursing home or some sort of assisted living up in Grand Island, Holiday Island. Holiday Island. So they're not even here a lot of the time. And they have one here, but they're really busy. But on a cluster level, we have several youth programs and children's classes going on that are aimed at a neighborhood, not at Baha'is, at the neighborhood. And the only place that we have a Baha'i center in the entire cluster is in Springdale. And oftentimes the Baha'is, even though our community boundaries are defined civilly, will go down there to join together on holy days and things of that nature. There are 9 holy days in a Baha'i year to commemorate the declaration of the Bab, who was the forerunner of Baha'u'llah, and Baha'u'llah's declaration, then both of their ascensions, and then Nowruz, and let's see, that's a bunch of them. Anyway, out of the 9, 6 of them happened between March 21st and May 29th. So we have a lot of them about this time of the year. And that's just after our fast. We have a fast every year. I was going to get into this before the calendar died on me, but we fast for one of the months, Baha'i months, from sunrise to sunset. No food, no drink, no nothing. You shouldn't even smoke because it's considered a liquid, but with addictions, that's not always possible. And then we get to celebrate Nowruz, which is the new year, is March 21st. But the day that all of our elections take place is over a period called Rizvan, which is from April 21st, which is next week, starts Monday, and goes through May 2nd. And those are the 12 days during which we associate the inauguration of the Baha'i Faith with Baha'u'llah's declaration. He spent his entire adult life being imprisoned, tortured, and exiled repeatedly. And once he would be imprisoned and sent off, exiled to one place, all of the guards would start to fall in love with him, and then they'd have to send him to another place. And then the people would be really mean and persecute them, and then they'd start changing them. And then and this just kept happening to Baha'u'llah. I mean, he was exiled from Tehran to Baghdad, to Constantinople, to Adrianople, to Egypt, and then to Haifa, which was not Haifa, Akka, the prison city. And I was going to show you the port where we actually visited the jails. They had 71 Baha'is crowded into 3 cells. The cells were about, would you say 10 by 12 maybe? That was it. 71 people in 3 cells. And they were that way for years. So any business they had to do was done right there in that cell. That was just horrible. And they gave them rotten food, and they were sick, and people died there, and including Baha'u'llah's second son. So it was a life of torment for most of it. I don't want to overstay my welcome, but I love answering questions as to the best of my ability. I had to laugh. Once Spencer coaxed me through the descriptions for the ad, coaxed that out of me. he came back and he said, oh, this is great. You know, you've been a Baha'i for 40 years, you've done this, you've done that. He says, now people will accept that you can speak with authority on this. And I just had to laugh, because in the Baha'i Faith, no person has authority, only the institutions. And so, going back to this investigation of truth for yourself, I got no authority, man. But I'm happy to share it. I love this, and it has changed my life. I've shared this with Pastor Carl, but my mother suffered from depression from the time I was in 3rd or 4th grade. Separated from my father, got back together. It was just a miserable time. And I was literally raised by a woman who was depressed all the time, because that was before all of the drugs and therapies and stuff that exist today. And it's taken me 60-some years to try to get rid of this depressed mindset that I drag along with me out of childhood, because once you've passed puberty, Abdu'l-Baha says there ain't no change in how the plant grows. All you can do is cut off the limbs. But it's part of the reason why I committed that song to that opening prayer, because he says, I'll no longer be sorrowful and grieved. I'll be a happy and joyful being. And I'm finally, after 60-some years, finally learning how to do that. It's been a pleasure. I do want to close with a song that I wrote for my daughter's wedding. And it's kind of a benediction. I told Pastor Carl that I knew what I wanted to start the talk with and what I wanted to end with. It was everything in between. I hadn't a clue. But this isn't a prayer, but it is a benediction. And I realized after I had played it for my daughter's wedding that it really kind of, if society's building block is the family, it would apply equally to people. So, may the love of God surround you. May the light of God burn bright within your soul, so His light will shine from you forever and guide your way home. May the words of God always guide you. May their truth and their song so resonate within that His music will fill your lives forever and guide your way home. When the world is good and ready, it will no longer need to cling to selfish thoughts and superstitions. Then all the people will learn to sing. May the mercy of God surround you. May forgiveness and trust so fill your lives within that respect will bind you to each other and guide your way home. When the world is good and ready, it will no longer need to cling to selfish thoughts and superstitions. Then all the world will learn to sing. All will sing. May the love of God surround you. May the light of God burn bright within our souls, so His light will shine on each other
Love will find our way. Love will guide our way. Love will free our way. Only love can see our way back home. God is ever calling us back home.
Thank you, dear friends.